Hello and welcome to episode 45 of the Australian Roundtable Podcast on Sunday, the 16th of August 2015. I'm your host, John LeBon, and I'm joined via Google Hangout by Ethan Nash of TOTT News. Thanks for being there.
Good to be here, Johnno.
And I'm also fortunate enough to again have with me live in the studio our resident wise old elder, the Silver Fox himself, Lindsay. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And for any new listeners, I'll just read out this quick little blurb. The ARP is a Brisbane-based independent news analysis discussion roundtable, which broadcasts live every Sunday from 3 p.m. AEST. Live listeners can take part in a live chat forum at the YouTube channel during broadcasts. All episodes are archived at that channel and also available in MP3 format for you to download for free from our website, ausroundtable.com. That's AUSroundtable.com. Views presented by individual panelists and guests are not necessarily representative of the entire panel, and all important information cited during the broadcast will be linked to at our site so you can verify and analyze it for yourself, which we always recommend you do. Episodes generally run 2 hours, and I'll get to today's rundown right now. We'll start off by taking a quick look at a Vegemite watch update and more Haron Monis Sydney siege hoax propaganda. And then in the domestic segment, we'll take a look at G20 expenses still rising months after the Brisbane summit, politicians' public approval ratings plummeting, no jab, no play, vaccination laws to be introduced in Victoria, New South Wales Farmers Association drinking the carbon Kool-Aid, parasitism and Australian banks, and Australia to expand the bombing of ISIS in Syria. And then in international, we'll take a look at Scotland banning GM crops, News Corp planning to sell off its education unit, Jewish groups getting 94% of US Homeland Security grants, a minority of people supporting immigration according to the most recent polling, and if we get time, look at Joe Biden and some big admissions that he's been making. So another packed show, Lindsay, and it's good to have you with me again.
No, it's good to be here. I enjoy this. How long it's going to go on for, we don't know, but it's good to be here.
It's always enjoyable. See, because you stopped coming live to the studio, I forgot that you're always here half an hour early. So I was just chilling out, taking it easy, and I get a knock on the door, and there's my old mate Lindsay. But good to have you. It's a shame that we don't have Ethan with us today. Ethan, how are things down there in the south of southeast Queensland?
Yeah, not too bad. Johnno is as good as they'll ever be in the crumbling rural regions around Brisbane. I'm doing well down here. It's been a big week of news, and I'm actually excited and looking forward to this episode because there's a lot of good topics to discuss.
Well, in the live chat, Justice for Germans has posted a link to the Reddit comments of the topic to do with vaccinations, and I'm actually planning to touch on that myself. So thank you, Justice. I'll be talking more about that soon. But first off, we're taking a look at the Vegemite watch update. So, Lindsay, this is yours.
Yeah, thank you for that. Look, I put retraction here because anyway, after last week, I thought we'd better make a retraction. So this was on the Courier Mail page 8 on the 10th of August, and the headline said, Vegemite watch, not on the PM's menu. And I'll go straight. I'll start off with saying, after we mocked the shocking revelations, which is what the Courier Mail says, in the Vegemite watch article last week, I feel it's only really fair to give a right of reply to the government. And we were very fortunate in the Courier Mail did that for us this week. So I'll just quote them. Quote, Tony Abbott has ruled out a Vegemite watch type program to stop Indigenous communities getting drunk on the iconic spread. Shocking revelations by the Sunday Mail that some Indigenous communities were buying Vegemite in bulk to make homebrew outlines the tough road governments and communities wanting to crack down on alcohol abuse and domestic violence. The last thing I want is to have a Vegemite watch, Mr. Abbott said. And that was the end of the quote.
And I probably should have given the background there. We talked about this, I don't know if it was a week or two ago, the idea that these Indigenous communities, the shopkeepers were going to be asked to keep track of who was buying Vegemite because allegedly it could be used to brew their own alcohol. And I looked into that, and apparently that's a myth to begin with. There you go. You've got it straight from the horse's mouth. No Vegemite watch anymore. What's the next piece you've got there for us?
Okay. Yeah, this was I put this in because I knew you loved this story. So I put it in just for you, just to look after you. This is the Courier Mail, page 7, on the 15th of August. And the headline was, Why Monis was set free. And quote, prosecutors did not appeal a magistrate's decision to release Haron Monis on bail because it was only 3 days before their Christmas holiday started. It can be revealed. So there we are. anything to keep this going in the public mind. That's my opinion of it. Next week, we'll learn that he had his nails manicured before the siege. And why was he not stopped in time, or some other drivel like that? So anyway, that's my opinion. But I'll throw it back to you, Joe.
They'll do whatever they have to keep this nonsense story in the people's minds. And if you're a new listener to the ARP, we covered this on episodes 11, 12, and 13, breaking down the Sydney siege for the utter and blatant hoax that it was. But sure enough, almost every week they'll put in an article like that just to keep it fresh in the people's minds. And Ethan, I haven't gone back and listened to one of those episodes for a little while, but I'm still proud of the work that we did there. We broke that hoax down for what it is, but the mainstream media just keeps peddling the nonsense.
Yeah, Jono, and we thought that our exposure would have come from the G20 summits here in Brisbane, and it didn't happen to be. And then episode 11, where we broke it down, I think we did a fantastic job. It's still climbing in views, and we were really the first outlet in the country to really break it down for what it was, and look at the government lies, look at the media lies, and look at the agenda behind it. And now they just have to keep regurgitating all of this nonsense up in the media. You know, we saw the kid throw the rock in Martin Place and the toy machine guns. It all has to keep being regurgitated to remind people that there's evil boogeymen out there and they're coming for your rights. And it's just ridiculous. This is precious newspaper space and airtime that's being taken up by this nonsense. And unfortunately, the people, especially recently, people that I've encountered believe it, and not only believe it, it's actually having an effect on them mentally and obviously for health reasons as well, just the state of fear that they're in because of these imaginary boogeymen, Jono.
I still remember the news reports that I was analysing for the work that I was doing at the time, and there was a newsreader saying, our cameramen were never far away as man Haron Monis terrorised his captives. And I went back and looked at some of that not too long ago, and it actually does make me laugh out loud now that I fully understand exactly what it was. But the thing is, to the majority of Australians, the Sydney siege was a real thing, and how dare anybody question it? It's on the news. It must be real. And how do they know it's real? Well, the news keeps talking about it. Would the news really keep talking about this
if it wasn't real?
I think you can trust the news.
Well, Rupert owns it.
Well, we'll be talking more about our mate Uncle Rupert shortly. But let's get into the domestic segment proper then. And the first article for today is to do with the G20 expenses still rising months after the Brisbane summit. Ethan.
Yeah, thanks, Jono. Now, for those who are unaware, particularly new listeners who have joined us recently, myself, Johnno and Lindsay were on the ground at the 2014 G20 summit here in Brisbane as it unfolded, and documented the event with 3 G20 specials on this channel and on my website, tottnews.com. Now, this week, news about the G20 has popped up again, and it is in relation to the expenses that we heavily criticised here on this show. So let me read out an article by the Sydney Morning Herald from this morning entitled G20 Hotel and Taxi Bills Still Rising 9 months after the Brisbane Summit. Quote, they came, they spoke, and they left on private jets. But the hangover for the taxpayer from last year's G20 Leaders Summit in Brisbane goes on. A dozen hotel bills and taxi fares for G20 attendees have been upwardly revised by $1.8 million in recent months, government tender documents show. A single contract with cab charge for the provision of taxis was originally $50,000, but payment to the company has since risen to $627,000, an increase of more than 1,200%. In total, 12 contracts with hotels and serviced apartments providers blew out from $917,000 to $2.2 million. For example, the bill for the room at the Oak Charlotte Towers in central Brisbane has spiraled from $131,000 to $470,000, the Department of Finance documents show. The revised tender documents are not the grand total for G20 accommodation. This was closer to $13 million just for accommodation. A spokesman for the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet said that the original purchase order for taxis had been raised in the earliest phase of the project, but as the project scaled up, the purchase order was amended appropriately to meet the necessary requirements. The department said the hotel bill had blown out due to last-minute cancellations that had been covered by the government because it had booked out entire hotels for, quote, sole use during the event. And the article goes on to talk about how Abbott's office has somehow saved 33.6 million through efficiencies, etc., and just go detailing really the cost. Now, when we first covered what to expect from the G20 here on the show in advance, it was revealed that the cost of the summit exceeded over $500 million in total, including ludicrous measures like $25,000 chairs and a range of unjustified elitist expenditure. The main focus, though, was on security, which was completely exposed when our city saw some of the most peaceful protests in the summit's history. But Johnno, it seems, despite never being held accountable for the fact that the taxpayer money we had to fork out for this was completely unjustified because it was essentially a ghost town, it still seems that the expenses are continuing to rise, and it seemed like an awful bit of a hassle for a summit that really deserted Brisbane, and we were on the ground to cover it, Johnno.
Well, the city was largely deserted except for all of the police who were around. And of course, I got stopped and asked for my details, was it 5 or 6 times in the one day when I was covering that event? And my only crime to, justify them singling me out and coming and asking me for my details, like I said, 5 or 6 times in my own country, in my own city, was that I had a big placard questioning the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That was the crime that got me pulled over by the police as I was walking around. So I wonder how much extra they spent on the police during the summit alone. I mean, how much more money was going into the police and the police union as a result of the event. And of course, like I said, what they were doing, they were just pulling over people like me for daring to exercise my right to criticize the government in a country that's supposed to be a democracy, Lindsay.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And it might have something to do here as well.
Yeah, that wouldn't have helped me. Yeah.
But anyway, no, I agree with you. It shouldn't matter what you look like anyway. Well, the only problem I had was that I walked with you downtown at one stage and they didn't pick us up. So it must be me. So my company.
Maybe.
Anyway, enough of that. Enough of this bullshit.
No, you're right, mate. We've got just over 30 people watching live. Freddie K says, "Do you remember the extreme weather that weekend?" And now that he mentions it, I do. It was extremely hot that weekend.
It was,
which would have just led to there being less people out and about anyhow. And there was times, and I'm sure I've got photos of it that I could probably make a video about if I wanted to. You definitely have photos about this, Ethan, of just dozens of police officers at one corner just standing around because they literally had nothing else to do.
Yeah, that's right. And they were on city corners with semi-automatic weapons and walking around in their heavily plated armor and all of this nonsense. And as I said, going back to the original article, all of this expenditure was unjustified because they hyped this up with a media hysteria that rebels and anarchists are going to come to the city. And what resulted was the city was deserted and it was only filled with these police, which, as I mentioned, cost over $500 million in total for the entire event, importing police for the chairs, the tables. And it came out this week, I didn't include it in the show, but politicians in this country from the 2015 financial cycle have claimed, I can't remember the exact amount because I don't have the details in front of me, but it equivalated to $5.5 million per MP of how much they have claimed in taxpayer expenses to travel and to do all of these things. And someone just mentioned in the comments before, why can't they pay their own expenditure? Why are we here with a $3 million bill that has to be paid by the taxpayers for their accommodation when all of these MPs and these elitists are getting so much money? It's ludicrous. And Johnno, we exposed it here. It should be held accountable for the actions. It should be held accountable for the biggest waste of money that this city's ever seen, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up all the propaganda before the event. Now that you bring it up, I remember it really well. The front page of the Courier Mail had these full-page photos of anarchy, and it showed what I think were photos from one of the Canadian G20s in the years prior. And at that one, I think something like 500 to 1,000 people were arrested and put into those temporary overnight arrest centers. And Ethan, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but did we ever actually find out where they were supposedly going to take any of their temporary detainees for the Brisbane G20? Because knowing what I know now about media fakery and these kinds of things, I'm now starting to wonder if they even bothered having that many places set aside, or if they knew pretty full well that by propagandizing as much as they did, they wouldn't even have to make any arrests because no one would come out.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about, and we asked the question on the show: where are people going to be taken? The Brisbane Watch House can't hold. If we are expected to follow a path, a precedent that the Canadian G20 and the others have set, if that's what the media is telling us, where are all the arrests going to go? And we asked this, we hypothesized maybe they'll use Suncorp Stadium as a way to detain people in there. We saw in Canada, people just got put in cages for 24-hour periods. They just got thrown in cages in the middle of big rooms like animals. It was disgusting. So we thought about that, and we wondered what was going to happen, and where were these people going to be taken? Were we going to be taken on buses? What was the deal? And we never got to see that, and we never got to hear an answer to that, because there was only 11 arrests in total throughout the whole event. So it's certainly interesting to think of whether they knew with police presence and propaganda that this would happen, or whether they were preparing for it to happen and it didn't happen. It was certainly an interesting event, and I'm glad that we got to cover it on the ground, Johnno.
Yeah, I agree with you, mate. And look, there are so many things to cover and so many rabbit holes to go down that you forget. I've actually got a heap of stuff on my computer from what I plan to do about the G20. Of course, there were other things to do with that as well. The fact that the so-called protest movement was led by Indigenous groups calling all of us whiteys the devil of the earth and all these kinds of things. And there were all these other issues that came out from G20 that I never really got around to properly covering with videos or anything. So maybe at some point in the future I'll do that. But yeah, you're right, Ethan. We did get together and we thought that covering the Brisbane G20 would be a good way to get this show, get it started, get some. Yeah. But it never really turned out that way. The event was largely uneventful, and it was only a few weeks later that the man Haron Monis false flag hoax came along, and that's when we started getting some traction. But we need to move on to the second topic for domestic today. It's to do with politicians' public approval plummeting, Lindsay.
Yeah, and this follows really well on from what Ethan was just saying a minute ago. This was on the Courier Mail on page 9 on the 10th of August. Politicians shackled in dungeon of disapproval. And the quote is, federal politicians will gather in Canberra today at what is most certainly their lowest point in public approval. After 4 weeks of daily news of the excess use of politicians' entitlements, the 226 senators and lower house members have become the target of abuse and disgust. End of quote. Now, my take on this was a bit like you've just done, Ethan. Does this remind us of the cries of woe by both Queensland and New South Wales chief magistrates last week or the week before, that they had been threatened by members of the public? Now, to the politicians, I would say, get used to it, fellas. It's only going to get worse. And you can't say you don't deserve it. You are disgusting, profligate filth. And you know it. No matter how much you claim to be within the guidelines, you know damn well that you're just stealing this money under false pretenses. So get over it.
You tell them, Lindsay.
No, that's all right. Well, that's
get stuck into them, I say.
No. It just I can't believe that they're that slimy that they think they can get away with this indefinitely and nobody will react. And anyway, that's
well, their counter argument might be, well, nobody's reacted so far.
So yeah.
I mean, how far do they have to raise people's taxes? How many of our civil liberties do they have to erode? How much do they have to flood us with immigrants? How much do they have to propagandize us? How many vaccinations do they have to force our children to take before people have any pushback?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And maybe that's what we need to do is, as individuals, go and stand outside of politicians, whether they're electoral office, and wait till they actually turn up from Parliament House and give them a hard time out in the front. Just embarrass them constantly. I can remember seeing a video on YouTube where this fellow was walking down the road behind Tony Abbott, yelling out about, you're sucking up to the Jews and things like that to him. And he was absolutely mortified. You could tell by his face. And his mind just didn't know where to go or what to do. And I think if you did a few, not just about Jews, but in general, you just embarrassed them constantly in public everywhere they went. It might take them down a peg or two, and they might start to realise that they're only human beings. And I think Whitlam said it in the paper this week. He called them, apparently in his day, he called all these blokes pissheads. Did you see that?
Yeah, that was with regards to flight. So the story that came out recently was that back in his day, Whitlam had taken away first class or business class flight rights from his ministers and told them they had to fly economy class. And the story goes that he said to them, I'm a great man even when I fly economy class, whereas you people are all piss ants even if you fly first class. And it's a good story, and I want to believe it's true. But then I wonder sometimes about how they change history to make us like or dislike, past leaders and this kind of thing. But Ethan, any thoughts you wanted to make about Lindsay just going bang with the politicians?
Yeah, it was very well written, Lindsay, and that's what people have to do. We have to get stuck into them, and people are trying to pretend like the lack of confidence that we have in our so-called political representatives is a shock. It's something that shouldn't be there. It's supposed to have news articles written about it. It's supposed to, confidence in our government is down. Of course it's going to be down if they're not doing a job that serves the people. I mean, that should just be the normalized thing. In a perfect world, they should be reporting when the government does something good, because that is outside of the normal, not this. We should have every right to be upset with our elected officials that have sold out to a corporate interest, have sold out to the masters that are above them, and they're selling this country out. So we have every right to be angry, and Lindsay has every right to get stuck into them on this show, because people need to be fed up. People need to say that we've had enough, and we need to try and find a way to make them be held accountable for their actions, Johnno.
I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore.
What words to that effect?
I think we should rally our audience to do that, Johnno.
Well, I've got a little idea that has just popped into my mind. So for the after show, don't let me forget to canvass an idea that I've got about how we can actually do something. We'll talk more about it in the after show, but we'll move on to the third topic for domestic, and it's to do with no jab, no play vaccination laws to be introduced in Victoria, Ethan.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, once again, vaccines are back in the press, and this time childcare centres are once again the focus of attention, and those who are opposed, as usual, to these proposals are the target of much scrutiny in this country. So just let me read out an article by the ABC this morning entitled "No Jab, No Play, Vaccination Laws to be Introduced in Victoria." It's a short article. Quote, "Victorian preschoolers will be banned from attending childcare or kindergarten unless they are vaccinated under new no jab, no play laws to be introduced by the state government. The new laws will be introduced within weeks and come into effect on January 1st. Vaccinations save lives," Health Minister Jill Hennessy said. "We are getting tough on this issue because it's important that we are addressing things like a significant increase in whooping cough. We know the spread of things like measles is becoming more viral." Miss Hennessy said that there are 1,000 more cases of whooping cough this year compared to last year. She said the matter was a community safety issue. "It's not just in the interest of the individual child, but all of us," she said. "Our aim is to not exclude kids from early childhood services. Our aim is to get people immunized, and we're going to use this as an incentive and a prompt," end quote. Now, first of all, without even speaking what the article is about, you can easily break down what is being published here. It's a short article, going back through it. The first part, note that the laws come into effect on January 1st. And just as the no jab, no pay laws are set to be made law as well, what we're campaigning for, the family tax benefits. So it's the same date that these two legislative pieces are going to be put into play. The second part is, she says, vaccinations save lives, which is a generalized statement with no justification behind it. The third part, you can see she references whooping cough again, which herd immunity has been exposed numerous times as a myth. The fourth part, you can look, she said it was a matter of community safety, so emotional rhetoric to get people on board. And the fifth and final one, she said, our aim is to get people immunized. And once again, we've said on the show numerous times, there's a difference between vaccination and immunization, and people are completely oblivious to it. So right there, you can just break down this article and expose it for what it is, a load of nonsense. Now, in terms of the content itself, we've already spoken in depth on this show about the dangers and misconceptions of vaccines, and I can't stress enough that people go and check out episode 30 of this show, where we were on location at the Sunshine Coast, and we spent the first 90 minutes of the show speaking about this. So I won't speak about them here, obviously, but I do implore everyone to go and check that out. But what we're seeing here isn't anything new. This has come into law in New South Wales already, being banned from childcare centres. The discussion has started here in Queensland to introduce it. We covered that on the show. And now we see it moving to Victoria. So, Lindsay, you can see when you step back and look at this, not just domestically, but worldwide, there's a calculated incremental move here, in my opinion, to make vaccines mandatory by coercion and deceit. And once they get this through, mate, the amendments are only going to get worse from here. Lindsay, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, as you were speaking about that, it just reminded me of something I saw on a website during the week, where they were talking about they're trying to force adults in California to do it. Like mandatory vaccination for adults, and that's even another step forward again. So it's almost like everything that happens, it happens worldwide. It's almost like there's an invisible hand. What a surprise that is. Yeah, no. So I'm not surprised at all that they're doing this. I think we've just got to try and disrupt them as best we can. I think that's, they think they've got it down and dusted, and I think we've got to just upset their little apple cart. And the only way we're going to do that is, like you say, enough people get on it and embarrass politicians, embarrass public servants if you can, and get the message through to them. We're not happy about this. You think you got us, we're all idiots, but we're not happy, and we're not going to play ball with you. That's my view of it. But I don't know, Johnno might have a different view.
Well, the way I see it, the propaganda is having its intended effect, and the mind control through school and through television and newspapers, it might not affect us as much as they want it to, but it does affect the masses. And I'll read out some examples from the Reddit Australia thread that's related to a similar article from the ABC. These are some of the top comments from Jupiter Crash. 41 points, that's 41 upvotes more than downvotes. The reply is, fantastic, definitely a move in the right direction. The direct reply is, beginning to get an idea why my mates are moving to Victoria. In other words, he supports it as well. The next top comment from Doggy015, 28 points, brilliant, herd immunity only works if everyone in the herd is vaccinated, which just shows they don't even know what herd immunity is all about. But anyway, another comment that supports all of this. The next top comment with 54 points. And if you don't understand how Reddit voting works, it's not a simple, the net upvotes go to the top of the thread. There's another algorithm they use, but this is the next top comment by Leadback. Good. Anti-vaxxers deserve to be publicly shamed and humiliated. Right? Then you go down a little bit further. This is wonderful news. A person's chance of having an adverse reaction to a vaccine is about 1 in 1 million. To put that in perspective, blah, blah, blah. So they go on about this. Next comment is good. Next comment is we need this law. The next comment, and this is the last one that I'll read for now. Good. The anti-vax nutcases need to realize it puts other people at risk. They are too stupid to understand this. So laws like this are necessary, and on it goes. Now, a lot of those comments could very well easily be sock puppet accounts used to control crowd psychology and all the rest of it. Sure, that could be the case, but it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of those people are actual people who watch a lot of TV and think that the news is here to inform them, Lindsay.
Yeah. I had a fellow that comes and mows our lawn at one stage, and he was saying much the same thing. You put these arguments to him, and he'd say, "Oh yeah, but if it wasn't for vaccines, we'd all be dead." Things like that. Well, how do you get over that sort of thing? When you can try, but you're really pushing it uphill when you're dealing with somebody who thinks that way. And I'm sure he's not alone. And so when you read those out, I thought, I'm quite willing to believe there are people like that who've got those opinions, because I come across them out in the world.
There's heavy programming going on, and what happens is they appeal to people's emotions. They make those people believe that the so-called anti-vaxxers, the ones who don't support forced vaccinations, so even people like me who are saying, if you want to vaccinate your children, I personally think you're a bad parent because you clearly haven't looked into this for yourself. But if you want to, they're your children, that's your right. All I'm saying is other parents who don't want to do that should have the right to not do that and not be, financially or otherwise, burdened for making that decision. Who the hell are you to tell them they have to get that done? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But they would call me an anti-vaxxer just for having that position. And the TV tells them, those anti-vaxxers, they want to harm your children. They're out to hurt you. They're out to hurt your children. They're the bad people. And unfortunately, the dumber somebody is, the easier these appeals to emotions work. And so you can't even have a rational discussion with somebody because instantly the emotional programming kicks in. And if you think that a rational argument is going to trump hours and hours and hours of conditioning through TV, then you simply don't understand the power of the TV, Ethan.
Yeah, that's right. And in terms, Johnno, you summed it right on the head there, but in terms of public debate and media coverage that this is getting, this is, I would dare say, the most important topic that we have in the country now, because it relates to everyone and everyone has an opinion about it. And that's why they don't cover the rallies that we've been to, because if they went to the rallies, people would realize that half, if not more, of the crowd, as Lisa and General Maddox can attest to, are people that believe that vaccinating your children are good. They're people that believe that vaccinating your children is a safe and healthy thing to do, and they have done it with their children, but they're there to defend freedom to choose from a state-enforced policy. And that's what it is about here. And we can't get through to people because the media are so strong with their programming that this issue has become an issue where if you try to invoke critical conversation, you get backlash like you've never imagined. We've had speakers like Dr. Sherry Tenpenny banned from entering this country. That's how bad that it has got here. But the positive thing is the resistance to this is also a large one. It's just the media aren't covering it. And we have the next set of national rallies coming up on September 20th, which will also be the end of season 1 of the Australian Roundtable podcast as well. So it's a nice little way to round it out that day when we can speak about it. But this, as I said, this is an important topic, and these laws are coming into play January 1st next year, the Victorian one and the main one that's coming in to revoke family tax benefits and the rest. They're all coming in a matter of months, and people are fed up and they're doing it. And the Australian Vaccination Network right now trying to make a documentary with stories from people that have adverse reactions and whatnot. This is a very important topic, and hopefully, Johnno, as the months come on in our individual work and on this show, we can cover it a lot more and try to make some pieces that really get through to the masses to try and sway the opinion, to understand that this, whether you're for vaccines or against vaccines, this is about freedom of choice, Johnno.
Well, in the live chat, Ella says, I'm not anti-vaxxer, I'm pro-choice. And it is important that those of us who can see through the simple dialectics of the media, that we use language to our own advantage. And I'm the same, I'm pro-choice. I think it's terrible that if you want to, you can go and inject these nasty chemicals with no idea of what they're going to do long-term into your children. There's little children who depend on you to do the right thing by. I think this is atrocious, but I would rather you be allowed to decide what happens to that child than the state, even if you are completely misinformed by the mainstream media. I am very much in favor of you having that choice, just as I'm in favor of other parents saying, well, you know what? I think human beings have either evolved or been created to be able to withstand things if we just feed them properly and treat them properly. And we don't need to be sticking all of these chemicals into their bodies when they're at their most vulnerable. I'm not going to do that to my child. I say I support that choice as well. I'm very much pro-choice. I'm not anti-vaccination. I'm pro-choice. And I think if more of us start speaking along these terms, Lindsay, it might help to start get this idea out there that this message that the media is giving you, that we're the evil people, well, you can trust the media if you want to, but I'm telling you right now, I'm pro-choice. I'm pro your right to choice.
Yeah. No, I agree with that entirely. The only thing, I go a little bit further in that I have seen children with a day or two after they've had the vaccination, and you've got this great big swelling that takes up half their leg, or wherever it's been given, and I really don't think that can be good for. When you see the size of this thing compared to the body of the child, you imagine yourself if you had something like that come up on you, that can't be good for your system to be overloaded with that extent. So I agree with you as far as the pro-choice thing goes, but just I also have the opinion that I've seen that example, and it really does worry me what's going to happen.
Oh, don't get me wrong, Lindsay.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I support these vaccinations. What I'm saying is, even though I think the parents who would go and do this to their children are very misguided by the mainstream media, I still support their right to the choice. Yeah. I'd rather trust misguided parents than a misguided state.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. So it's a bit of it's a little bit of a difficult thing for me, because I agree with you. You have to trust your parents. It's their right. It's their child. But it just worries me that when I see what's happened to other kids that have had this. So, anyway, I'll leave it at that. I won't waffle on.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Well, Ethan, this is your topic, and you've been the one to really bring up the vaccination thing right throughout the run of the first season of this show. So I'll leave the final thoughts on this topic to you. Yeah,
thanks, Johnno. It's just to reiterate that every major city, I'll leave links at AusRoundtable.com, are going to be having the rallies for free choice once again nationwide in every Australian city on September 20th. So about a month away, people are going to be rallying again, and I do encourage everyone to get out there, show your support, because the reaction that I saw walking through the street was people were shocked that there was so many people out there. As I said, either side of the spectrum, campaigning for free choice, and both of you have summed this up amazingly well. This is about free choice, about something as fundamental as human rights, and if the state can tell you what to do with your own child, then that sets a dangerous precedent. And that's all we're saying is we need to avoid that, because the state is not your friend. The state does not have your best interests in their agenda, and the state is not there to look after you. You have to make your own informed decisions, do the research, make your own decisions, and come to your own conclusion. That's all we're asking, Johnno, and hopefully we can speak about this a lot more as we get closer towards the date where this becomes law in this country.
No problemo. We'll move on to the fourth topic for domestic today. So do with the New South Wales Farmers Association drinking the carbon Kool-Aid, Lindsay.
Yeah, g'day, thanks. A friend of mine sent me a cutting out of the Land newspaper in New South Wales, but when I did a Google search, I couldn't come up with that article. So I found a very similar thing in the Sydney Morning Herald website on the 16th of July, and the headline read, "Climate Change, New South Wales Farmers Association changes policy, calls for fossil fuels transition." And I'll just read a quote from that site. "The Peak New South Wales Farm Lobby Group has shifted its climate change policy stance and has called on governments to back, quote, the transition from fossil fuels," end of quote. The New South Wales Farmers Association ended its annual conference on Wednesday by voting to remove clauses in its official policy that had called for a royal commission to, quote, explore the scientific veracity and soundness of claims that carbon is a pollutant, end of quote, and to investigate whether the activities of mankind are responsible for causing any change. In their place, members voted to replace those calls with a recognition that primary producers, quote, are on the front lines of seasonal variability exacerbated by a changing climate, end of quote. Now, my comment on this is, I'll make it very brief, Ethan, and then I'll pass to you. My comment is, don't be surprised by this. Rural politicians and industry leaders hold themselves out as conservative, but my experience is that when push comes to shove, they often are red on the inside, as evidenced by this backflip that we've just talked about on climate change. And also, I remember that there were 3 National Party leaders who swing behind the Republic at the 1999 referendum after years of holding themselves out as monarchists to their constituency. So that's my experience with it. Now, Ethan, I'll see if you've got any comment on this.
Well, Lindsay, thanks for bringing that up. Firstly, I hadn't heard of that until I read your agenda. That's an interesting development, because right there was an avenue to try and explore some of the alternative sides, to try and justify the mainstream media and the government agenda that they're pushing with this, and it's just been completely shut out. And this is something that we see all the time, and especially in rural regions, as you've mentioned. And once again, this is just another perfect example of how the other side of the story is not presented. And for me, left, right, it doesn't matter where you're on. I encourage people to have different perceptions, to have different opinions to things, and to discuss them civilly and try to educate one another through the information. But the thing that every week we bring up in this show that gets to me is the fact that the other side of the story is never, ever shown. And this is, even if this was to be something that was going to be the same old regurgitated mainstream nonsense, it still was shut out. And that's a concern to me, Johnno, because we've gone through this on the show before about climate change, and there is another side to the story that a lot of people don't realize, and it's quite a large one.
In the live chat, Ed Upside Down Head says, "Why am I at the bar listening to this through headphones?" We've got many listeners all over the world, Lindsay, apparently Ed's in a part of the world where it's late at night and the bars are open. He's listening to us. And isn't it a privilege that people would listen to us while they're at the bar? Ed, how you doing, mate? Good to have you on board. Yeah, we've covered the climate change thing, for the climate change hoax, as I call it, for a little while now. We did a feature piece on it maybe 3 or 4 months ago. The time goes quickly. And of course, I covered the whole climate gate thing, which now, if you go to Wikipedia, they don't call it climate gate. They give it this really long name, the climactic something scandal, you know what I mean? But climate gate, what happened? The leading scientists were caught out, fudging the figures, talking about ostracizing those who didn't go along with their little scam. It's all there. It's all out in the open. And I remember when it happened at the time, it did get a lot of mainstream press, but these days I never hear about it in the mainstream press. And what I also covered at the time, you guys might recall, was how we're always told that Tuvalu and the Kiribati Islands and all these things, Kiribati Islands, whatever they're called, how they're sinking, but in fact, they're actually growing. They're not sinking at all. And you ask the average person on the street, how much of the sea level's risen? And I've done this, and I've got answers as ridiculous as a couple of meters, which isn't the case at all. So the propaganda is so strong that they can even convince people that sea levels are rising when objectively we know for a fact that's not the case. Such is the conditioning of the minds of the masses, Ethan. And with this particular one, Lindsay, when you brought this one up with me off the air before the show, I said how it's always set up like this from the start. Like people will be saying now, conservative voters who thought that the National Party was never going to cave into the climate change hoax, they'll be sitting there being really disappointed that their party has now betrayed them. But that was always going to be the case. They'll start off propagandizing the youth, then the youth will start voting Greens, and the Greens will be very much all about the climate change, this great problem that's facing us all and we have to act soon. Then eventually that'll infest the Labor Party, and then eventually they'll make it into the so-called Conservative Party. I mean, it's set up from the start to follow this logical progression to the point where I was actually surprised the Nationals hadn't already caved in. So, this is just the way that it's meant to be. And the thing is too, I mean, when I was in school, they were already propagandizing about climate change hoax. So in the 10 years since I finished high school, another 10 years worth of people have died off. Another 10 years worth of voters who might care about politics have reached old age and don't care anymore. Another 10 years worth of people who might have cared about politics significantly have now become family people who follow different interests, and a whole nother group of people who were children are now voting the way they were programmed to vote. So you see 10 years is they can do whatever they want in the space of 10 years. And so ClimateGate, which was closer to 10 years ago than it is today, it might as well be ancient history, because if the mainstream media isn't talking about it, people simply forget, Ethan. Yeah,
that's right, Johnno. And we live in a world now, especially in this state, just not too far away from where you two are broadcasting right now. The University of Queensland offers courses to not even to reinforce the models and the propaganda that has been exposed multiple times about climate change, man-made climate change. They are offering a course to refute the psychological patterns and the psychological meanings behind people that deny this. They're actually training people on how to approach so-called deniers, how to interact with them, and how to try and convince them otherwise, like it's a mental disorder, like it's something that people should go to some sort of building and get checked, and it should be a mental disorder. This is the country that we're living in, and the way that it's being pushed, it's unfortunate, because a lot of these people do have the best intentions at heart, but they don't realize that parties like the Greens, parties like all of these things, they're being sucked in, and they really do care about the planet, but they don't realize that they're being misguided, and unfortunately that's the country we live in. And just like the vaccine issue in this country, if you try to bring this up with people, they have been trained to respond in a way that sees you as an enemy. And that's going back to what I said at the start of this segment that Lindsay's done. There always needs to be two opposing sides to a story. Information flows. There's no such thing as right or wrong. There's no such thing as truth and fiction. It's all opinion. It's all perception. It's all information. And when the state feeds us their interpretation of what things should be, which is likely false, likely propagandized, or likely, out of our best interest to manipulate us, then that's a concerning thing, Johnno, and that's exactly what we're seeing here.
Right.
Yeah, and in the live chat, I think Dawn W777 says, does he not believe in climate change? I suspect that she's referring to me. Dawn, if you're a new listener, we've covered this in past episodes. What it appears to me that you've been trained to believe in, which is that there's this thing called climate change that is taking place right now, that humans are responsible. AGW, it was once upon a time called anthropogenic global warming. It is a complete and utter hoax and scam, and you can find this out for yourself if you just spend a little time looking into it. Sea levels haven't risen. They'll try and tell you that, oh, we've detected a few millimeters thanks to our satellites. Spend a bit of time just thinking about how that could be the case. The satellites could detect that in the first place from up in orbit. If you want to believe in satellites, look a little bit further, you'll find out that what we're talking about satellites is very questionable itself, but that's the best evidence they've got is this so-called satellite data. Look into their so-called science for yourself. Don't just accept that because experts or the media are telling you something that it's true. Look into it for yourself, and you won't have to look too far to realize that you've been scammed. And people will say, well, what's the motive? Why would they scam us about this? Well, we've now got an entire bunch of people who are saying they want the government to take more of their money to save the environment. Now, if you can't see the benefit to the government from convincing you that it should be able to tax the air that you breathe, then I can't help you. And then there are other groups who benefit as well, such as carbon permit trading. Now, you trade anything and you take a little cut on the transaction. Even something as simple as ComSec, trading shares, they take a little cut every time something's traded. So if you can bring in a carbon permit trading system, then it doesn't matter to you what difference it makes or not to the world. It's making a difference to you every time you trade some of the carbon permits. And then you look at some people like the current Prime Minister of New Zealand. You look at Malcolm Turnbull, our own Malcolm Turnbull, who was once the next in line to be the Prime Minister. You look at their links to investment banks, the very investment banks that will stand to make money from these kinds of shenanigans. And you can see there's plenty of people who benefit from bringing in the reaction to the so-called problem, which is why they're giving you the problem and they want you to have that reaction. Classic problem, reaction, solution. That's what the climate change scam is all about. But we need to move on to the fifth topic for today, and it's actually related to all of this. It's the parasitism of Australian banks. I'm not sure if I'm emphasizing the right syllable there, but the banks, Lindsay, are parasites.
Yeah, they are indeed. Look, I've got a number here. I don't want to bore everybody with it, but it all came out this week over 3 days. And when I was going through the paper yesterday, I couldn't believe that suddenly I hadn't noticed it each day when I was reading it, but as a group. So anyway, I'll get straight into it. The Courier Mail, page 18, on the 13th of August, the headline read, CBA boss defends card rate. And the quote was, the head of Australia's largest and most profitable bank says credit card interest rates are being set responsibly by the federal government's chief policy advisors say more needs to be done to keep banks honest. Then on the Courier Mail, page 50, which is the business section, on the 13th of August, it said, Simply Capital, CBA launch fundraising after $9 billion profit. And the quote from that was, the Commonwealth Bank has launched a $5 billion capital raising alongside its $9.1 billion profit. But analysts warn it may need to tap shareholders again to satisfy regulators. And my little comment on this was that within this article, there's a box. And in the box, it says cash profit up to 9.1 billion, net interest income up 5% to 75 billion, final dividend up 4 cents to $2.22. So my take on this was that 75 billion is how much is being pulled out of this nation in interest by one bank. No wonder the battlers are battling. Now, try to tell me we haven't all been stung by the parasite wasp. We were talking about this last week. And if you weren't listening, you'll have to just go back to last week. But it was quite a good article about parasitism and how wasps parasite larvae or whatever. And we were saying that the banks have been doing it to us. And this is a perfect example of it. 75 billion is an awful lot of money just for somebody who keeps a set of books. Anyway, I'll go on to the next one. This was on the Courier Mail, page 4, on the 12th of August, and it was plastic trickery, a bank ploy. Quote, the consumer watchdog suspects banks are using behavioural economics to trick customers into taking higher rate credit cards. The Australian Securities and Investment Commission, ASIC, also says reforms such as minimum repayment warnings can leave consumers paying less and that credit laws may need to be changed. The price of using plastic has risen over 4 years despite the official cash rate falling 2.75 percentage points. ASIC said policymakers need to understand behavioural economics. I'll come back to this again later, which reveals how biases drive particular segments of consumers to make suboptimal financial decisions about which credit cards are most appropriate. So I'll point out about that. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about the AWST thing. That's exactly what we're talking about there, when they talk about behavioral economics. They're playing us like suckers. Okay, this is the final one. Was from the Courier Mail, page 3, on the 11th of August, and the headline said, "Fees give windfall to banks." And the quote is, "Banks are now reaping more than $1 billion a year from 0% bank balance transfer credit deals that are often worse for consumers." And I'm sure you've seen it on TV where they offer, just switch over to us and you won't pay any interest for a year or whatever. Quote, "Ahead of a Senate inquiry into credit cards, an investigation by the Courier Mail found that since 2011, there has been a tenfold increase in the number of products with an initial grace on existing debts brought over from another card. The investigation also revealed, 1, debt that isn't cleared can end up being slugged a super high cash advance interest rate, not the standard rate for new purchases. And 2, those cards that boast longer periods of no interest can end up costing more because of hefty fees. And 3rd, rather than compete on price, banks are pulling the wool over consumers' eyes, luring people in with sweetheart deals, transfer rates, and flash-sounding slogans," said Choice Campaign Manager Erin Turner. Now, my last comment on this is, again, we have the admitted use. They admit up there that they're doing this purposely, that it's a scam. We have the admitted use of language as a parasite's sting. And believe you, they are parasites. All the major Australian banks had Rockefeller banks holding at least 12% shares back in the 1990s. So I can only imagine it's worse now. And we are the nutrient-laden host. We're just ripe for parasitism. And we've got to learn this. We've got to start thinking, no, if I don't go into a bank, eventually they will die on the vine. Now, I know it's difficult at the moment because we don't know how to get houses unless we take out mortgages and things like that. We might have to bite the bullet for 1 or 2 generations to put a stop to these parasites, to kill them off, because otherwise we'll never be rid of them. It's a bit like taking a drench for internal parasites in sheep or something like that. You've got to put a stop to it. Anyway, Ethan, I know you've got a few ideas on this. I'll ask you what you think about what those, and was there a particular reason you think the Courier Mail put all these in over 3 days? They've inundated us with us.
Thanks, Lindsay. And that was thanks for reading all of those out there. You are right; they are parasites, and we went through this last week on the show very effectively. The connections between the parasites and the wasps, and it was just a fantastic comparison. And when you actually look at it, you can say it. It reigns true when you look at it in the behaviour of some of these banks and these government interests at hand here. But in terms of the Courier Mail, I don't know what's going on with the Courier Mail. I'm not even going to try and think of where their minds are at. It's a madhouse over there, and they take enjoyment in publishing these articles that are just complete either nonsense, or they try to serve an agenda. And what they're trying to get into the minds of the people, I'm not sure about. But whenever we do talk about banks, whenever we do talk about the parasites that are just, you mentioned $75 million a year just going from one bank, the politicians taking $5.5 million each in expenses from the taxpayer. These people don't care. And I personally, when we talk about banks, I was lucky that I externalized myself from the banking system from a young age when I was doing accounting back when I was in school. And the first thing I said was, well, we just print money. It's just debt. And then, now we move on. We create money out of thin air, and that's how things are. Let's move on. And then that blew my mind straight away. So I was glad that I got to learn how things work and externalized myself. I only use credit cards on select occasions if I really need to. I'm not really entwined in all of those sort of systems that restrict people and people become dependent on. But I understand how people do get into that with the mainstream media and all of the manipulation that's at hand. And, to me, it's just all rigged. It's all an illusion controlled by those with the puppet strings. And you just mentioned in those articles, Lindsay, that there's admitted use, that they admit that they do this by design. It's been revealed that this is the way that things go. It's controlled. They're going to manipulate it the way that they want to, and the best option that you have is to externalize yourself from it. But unfortunately, Jono, I can see why people get tied up in this. This is why they created the illusion of the American dream that you should get a house and have a, get a car loan, get a car, get all of these things. More and more and more debt that just inflates and inflates, and everything is due to collapse by their calculated design, in my opinion. But it's all rigged. It's all an illusion. But people still believe the American dream. But those of us that are smart enough only realize it's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it, Jono.
Yeah, channeling George Carlin there. In the live chat, Silver Slave 333 says that if nobody could get a loan, how much would a house cost? And this, for me, is one of the key issues here. These days, the vast majority of the regular peasants have to take out a loan to get a house. And for most people, that's all they want. That's the main thing, to have a house that they can own, or that they can, putting aside all the arguments about what do you really own, just for argument's sake, that at least they can ostensibly own, or they can raise their own family, live their own life. That's what they want. But to do that now, you need to take out a mortgage to be able to afford to buy the house, because to simply rent and to save, you're going to have to live 3, 4, 5 lifetimes to save up the money. And that's if you're good with your money for the average person. So even if you don't believe in the banking system, the fact that everyone else does means that you're at a competitive disadvantage because of the way that money works, supply and demand. When we talk about supply and demand, we're not just talking about the number of people who want to buy the house that you want to buy. We're talking about the supply of money. And that's what's really going on here. When they are lending out all of this money, it just forces everyone else to get involved in the system. So Ethan, you say that you've managed to get yourself out of the money in the banking system. You might have, like, in a direct sense, but in an indirect sense, it's all around you every day. And then we take one step back and look at it more broadly. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Usury is slavery. And these people are parasites, Lindsay. You're quite right. People who didn't hear episode 44 last week, I recommend they go back. We spent a bit of time looking at the fact that there are parasites in nature, and humans are a part of nature. And you had better believe there are humans who have made it their business to be parasites. They tend to be very good at banking because that's the easiest way to parasite people. You lend them something that's make-believe, then you force them to pay you back more than that. You're parasiting on their labor. And that's exactly what's happening to this society today. And I believe that this, more than just about anything else, if you could wake up even a small percentage of the population to what's really going on with the banking system, it might be enough to get some people storming some buildings and putting some people in a quick trial with a noose waiting for anyone who couldn't answer some tough questions. Because what's happening today to the average person, to me, is disgusting. It all comes back to usury, Lindsay, is slavery.
No, I agree entirely. But it's not just what we pay in interest ourselves. Ethan was referring to that. But if you look at every business has to borrow money to get raw materials to build whatever they're building, which they then sell to you. Every truck driver that delivers goods to the shop that you buy them from has probably borrowed money to buy that truck. He's borrowing money to keep running it. And he's paying 10% interest, or whatever the interest rate was, the commercial rates at the time. And that's being added onto the product. So it's being added onto the product when it's manufactured. It's added on when it's transported. It's added on when it's retailed to you. And all the way through, you're paying that extra interest on top of every product you're buying. So you talk about parasites, man, they really know what they're doing.
Oh, you had better believe they do. And they've got a very clever system of, they'll set up, the same people who are really in charge of everything, they'll set up their own alternative media. So people who watch the regular news and realize that it's just complete nonsense, where do they go? Well, they'll go to the next line of gatekeeping. And much of the alternative media is always talking about the money system is designed to collapse. It's going to collapse. Any day now it's going to collapse. And sure enough, this money system, this fiat currency system, can't go on forever. I mean, no sane person disagrees with that. The issue is that so long as you're looking towards the future for the collapse of the currency, maybe not focus on the fact that right now this system is utterly corrupt and it's utterly evil and they're enslaving us. This is financial enslavement. Even if someone goes and takes out a 25-year mortgage and they pay back all of their repayments, and after 25 years they own their home, which is more than many people who don't even manage to do that. They'll take out a mortgage, but then they'll refinance it. This will happen, that'll happen. They'll end up with nothing in the end anyway. But even those who stick to it and end up owning their home, 25 years to own a home, Tell me how that isn't straight up slavery right from the start. If they're having to give up 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 48 weeks a year, plus the commute to their job, whatever. If that isn't financial enslavement, then tell me what is. It's clearly enslavement. Like I said, usury is slavery. And so long as we're worried about some collapse of the monetary system in the future, we're not seeing the forest for the trees here. This is already a detestable thing, which we should be speaking out about it right now. Collapse or no collapse. Ethan, what say you?
Yeah, I tend to agree, Jono. I do, I think that it is important to try and envision the future. I try to do that with every topic I bring up on the show. Where are they going? Where are the paths? Where are the end games with this? And I think with the financial system, it is important to at least prepare yourself for it. I've always been a big proponent of people, stocking up on food. If you go to the shops, get an extra can of food or whatever, because things are going downhill, whether you believe there's a collapse or not, whether you believe it. This system can't go on forever, and something is going to happen in the future. But I also agree with you, Jono. If you're concentrating too much on the future and you're not just if you're preparing too much for the future, you're not concentrating on the present and trying to stop it now before it happens. And that's the thing I think a lot of people don't understand, is that you can stop it before it happens. We can stop this by just simply exposing what's going on with shows like this, with discussions, with community groups, with trying to come up with alternative solutions, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, trying to think of ways that we can maneuver around this system, focusing on the present, but also preparing for the future. I think they can coexist, and I think that they should be done. But if you focus too much on the future, you'll blink and you'll miss the moment now. And I think that you either have to make a decision whether you're in the now or you're in there. And, it's a big topic, because, we can all hypothesize where it's going to go, and no one really knows exactly where it's going to go. You can have strong predictions for it. So it certainly is an interesting topic. And as I said, I've externalized myself a lot from my personal interactions with the banking system, with the world around me. I'm just preparing to look after the people around me in any way that I see fit. And I think if people just focus on that and focus on trying to stop it now, that's the main thing we should focus on, Jono.
Yeah, but I think there's a distinction that has to be made between the dollars, or the currency that is, because it's a fiat currency, it will eventually have to be replaced, and the broader system of financial enslavement. There's no reason why financial enslavement can't go on and on ad infinitum forever, so long as the people allow it to happen. So even if they do collapse the US dollar or the Australian dollar or all world currencies and bring in one world currency and all the rest of it, if and when they do that, that doesn't mean that financial enslavement stops. You would better believe that if and when they bring the collapse, they'll still have financial enslavement ready to go in another guise. So the issue isn't waiting for this currency to collapse, or the 21, whatever, how many trillions of dollars is the US is in debt at the moment. It's not waiting for that to boil over. The issue is saying, no, right now we're in financial enslavement. Either you believe usury is evil, or you believe it's okay. And if it's evil, then today's the day that you try to get yourself away from it, trying to get your friends and family away from it by talking about it. You don't wait for the collapse. And it strikes me there are a lot of people who are waiting for the collapse because they seem to think that's going to fix things. No, so long as you're taking out a loan, so long as your family and friends are taking out loans, rather than you guys pulling your own resources and doing your best to avoid the usury that's out there, then, so long as you're externalizing it, then other people are going to take advantage of it. If you really think the system is evil, as I do, you'll avoid taking out a mortgage, and you'll find a way to help those you care about do the same thing. And I think even though it's not ideal, people can, especially if they have a decent extended family, people can between themselves, even if they have to live together for a little bit longer, just to be able to buy the house and avoid the banks altogether. It can be done. But if you're, instead of doing that, going to wait for the whole system to collapse so that then you can jump in, the system's not going to collapse the way you think it is. The people who run the system are going to collapse it in the way that they need to, so they can pick up the pieces and keep it going. They want financial enslavement. They want us to be their slaves, and they're going to keep doing that so long as we keep offering ourselves up to be their slaves. Now, we need to move on to the sixth and final topic for domestic today, and that's to do with Australia expanding its bombing of ISIS in Syria. Ethan.
Yeah, thanks, Jono. And this is something right back at the start of the Australian Roundtable podcast, we hypothesized it was going to happen, and that is using both real and creative versions of ISIS as a justification to destabilize the Middle East to an even further standpoint. And that's what has been revealed this week. So I've got an article in front of me from the ABC on Thursday entitled "Islamic State. Tony Abbott confirms talks with coalition partners to consider extending airstrikes against extremists." Quote, Prime Minister Tony Abbott appears to be laying the groundwork for Australia to extend its airstrikes against Islamic State extremists from Iraq into Syria, confirming he has been in talks with coalition partners. Quote, obviously, there have been some approaches made at various levels, he said. We shouldn't get ahead of ourselves on this because no formal decision has been made and no formal request has been taken. Royal Australian Air Force warplanes have been bombing IS targets in Iraq since September. And today, Liberal MP and Chairman of Federal Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee, Dan Tehan, said it was time for Australia to step up its commitment. So earlier in the week, that's what was the catalyst of this. It was Dan coming out and saying that we should expand it. And now Tony Abbott confirming that he has done it. I'll continue the article here. We have the world's greatest humanitarian crisis occurring at the moment in Syria with over 9 million people displaced, he said. They're raping, they're murdering, they're pillaging, and we need to stop the foreign fighter flow to Syria. We have foreign fighters from Australia still going over there, and some history shows will try and return home and carry out attacks here. Mr. Abbott has never ruled out bombing Syria, but he has raised doubts about the legality of Australia operating in an ungoverned space with a regime we don't recognise. However, today he appeared more open to the idea. The death cult is just as evil on either side of the border. It's just as dangerous either side of the border, and it's just as deadly evil side either side of the border. Whatever nonsense Abbott's spilling out there, that's the end of the quote. Now, I don't have too much of anything really to expand on here. I was going to throw it to a discussion, but because most of our listeners obviously are aware of the situation, the motives and the agenda are here. But for those who aren't, essentially, when the so-called civil wars of Libya and Syria broke out a few years ago, around 2011, which was just US-backed rebels that were sent in to topple the democratically elected governments, they weren't able to crush Syria as easy as they did with Libya. And since then, there has been a campaign to bomb the country, but Obama was shut down in Congress, and there was no real justification to do so, you know. And as Abbott said, there's legal issues and whatnot because they don't recognize Syria. Now, for most who've been following the situation, like we covered on the show, we predicted that ISIS will supposedly branch into Syria, giving them justification they need to continue their quest of destabilization and control in the region. And the Australian is portraying the situation so far as just a thought in the air. But as we've seen time and time again, they plant seeds to normalize the idea into our subconscious before it happens. So the logical approach to take here in terms of our standpoint is to expect that this will be approved and Syria will become a target for our Royal Australian Air Force. So I'll throw it over to you there first, Lindsay. Did you hear about this new development, and what do you think is at play here from the information I just read out?
Well, I noticed in the Courier Mail an article along the lines of this. I didn't put it in, but basically it was, I think the headlines are something like Obama requests that we bomb, or Obama demands, or something like that we bomb Syria. And I remember thinking at the time, you know, I probably should put that in, not because of the bombing of Syria, but just the fact that Obama thinks he can boss us around to that degree, you know, and everybody's going to jump. Well, it's not just an expectation. He probably knows he can do that because of the way things are structured, and what a toe rag all our politicians are. But on what you were talking about, I had another article some time ago when I was talking about it, and I quoted General Wesley Clark's statement about there were going to be a war on 7 countries, which included Syria. That was some time ago. We made that point. So I've had it in my mind that they're going to try and get Syria, you know, one way or the other, because they already rolled Libya. Now they're talking about, well, Israel's pushing like mad to get them to bomb Iran. And I think the only one left then is North Korea. I might be wrong. There might be another one. But so I'm in two minds. This has been going on for a long time. We've talked about it in the past, that we think that this ISIS group is actually financed by both Israel and America. So they'll be doing the job. So America's got, like, it's got a foot in both corners. So they're paying for arms for the rebels, and they're also paying for the planes and the arms to go in and bomb the rebels. And so the end result you'll have a graveyard and a waste area in Syria when it's finished, and then they have reconstruction, which they did with Iraq, and then all their people go in and reconstruct, and it's worth trillions of dollars to their businesses. So that's how I view it. There may be other ways that other people view it, and I'm quite open to suggestions on it. Have you got anything on that?
Yeah, I'm going to put my fakeology hat on for a moment and question, how do we know that any of the information that's coming out about what's taking place in Syria is legitimate? How do we know that? Where are the legitimate sources of information coming from? And then, like in the live chat, a couple of people have said they think that, Syria is one of the few countries that doesn't have a Rothschild bank. And I used to believe that until I found myself questioning, well, how do I know that? Where's the objective information that'll tell me that the Syria doesn't have a Rothschild bank? Of course, if you look into the history of that entire region of the world and the way that the Ottoman Empire was carved up and how the borders all came to be, and then you realize the fact that the leading powers who by then already were controlled, whether it was the Rothschilds or other people, these nations that were already controlled prior to World War I, they were the ones carving up countries that are now there in the Middle East. How could they have ever not themselves have been controlled? Is it possible that this is another one of those controlled opposition alternative media narratives that we're given? Once you stop believing in the TV, you look for alternative media, and the alternative media tells you, oh, there's a war going on in Syria, but the TV tells you the Syrians are the baddies. Actually, the Syrians are the goodies, and they're being fought because they don't have a Rothschild bank. But is it just another false paradigm, a false dichotomy? And we have to question why we believe any of this stuff, Lindsay.
Yeah, I can see your point of view. I really haven't gone into it in depth enough. Like, I'm just thinking now. I thought, man, that could take me a week or two to get to the bottom of that if you were doing searches on it, and that's where I get rolled all the time, in that I just haven't got enough hours in the day to be doing the in-depth investigation we need in all these things. I mean, it's not just Syria; it could go on for many of the topics we use. So yeah, and I think that's probably what it needs. Though it probably needs somebody to go and do that sort of research into it and try and get to the bottom of it, the history of it, like you're saying. Were the countries that carved up the Middle East, were they all under the Rothschild banks at the time? Would that have flown on? Where do you end with this? Yeah. So I really don't know the answer to these things, and I think my mind boggles when I think, how am I going to find the answers? Maybe other people, maybe some of our listeners have done the in-depth work. We'd welcome it if you could send us information on it.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy if someone could say to me, John, here you go. Here's my objective proof that Syria does not have a Rothschild bank, because that would fit in with the notion that what's happening to them, is because of the fact that the Rothschild want to control their bank. Like that would make sense, but you just need the objective evidence. All right, then if the same people who control everyone else's banks don't control Syria, did they ever control Syria? When were they expelled? If they have never controlled Syria, then why, since the nation that we now know as Syria came to be after the Ottoman Empire was carved up, or at least that's my understanding. I mean, people can make their cases, but so far I hear people regurgitating what they're told by Zero Hedge or these other outlets, but I say, yeah, okay, but where's the actual evidence? And what I find interesting is the moment that you do that, very quickly they're like, but I just told you, I got it from Zero Hedge. Yeah, well, what's Zero Hedge? Like, what? Well, just because it's not Channel 7 doesn't mean that it's legitimate. It still has to be based on objective, verifiable evidence. And I personally haven't seen it. And Ethan, maybe you can change my mind on this one.
Well, yeah, I do disagree with that. I agree with you in terms of the Rothschild Bank, because a lot of people just say there's only 5 countries before 9/11 that didn't have a Rothschild controlled bank, et cetera, and that is grossly exaggerated and generalized, because if you actually look, there's some fantastic articles on the internet that break it down. I'm talking 10,000, 20,000 word articles that break it down, that break down the Rothschilds' actual influence in banks, and you'll see that it's a lot less than a lot of people think, and everyone says all banks are private and all of this. There's a lot of misconception there, and that I agree with that a lot of people have just been getting that from the alternative mainstream media, and I was one of those people that also would bring that up as a discussion until I did the research more. In terms of Syria, I remember when the so-called civil wars broke out, and a great friend of mine and mentor, who Gary Sullivan, who was in Syria at the time as it broke out, a journalist, he really took me under his wing. Back in the day, he was in Syria at the time, and he did some fantastic work in that country, showing people that what the media is telling you is wrong, that Syria is a beautiful country, that the people are taking up arms to rebel against US-backed rebels, and the Syrian people were really trying to rebel against what was happening in Syria at the time. And he was on the ground in Syria, and that's when I learnt from Syria and Libya what was really going on, especially Libya, where Gaddafi was loved by his people and revered by his people, and they painted him as an evil dictator. The same thing they're doing with Assad at the moment. But I learned through seeing it through a person that I respect, and a person that was on the ground at the time, making fantastic feature pieces, making fantastic videos, documenting what was really going on and opposing the mainstream media, and interviewing people in Syria saying, no, we're not, none of this is real, as the supposed chemical attacks happened and all of this stuff. The Syrian people were just saying, this is all propaganda, we're over here, they're trying to topple our regime, and we're not going to stand for it. And that's where I learned through Syria there. And I completely believe that it's a real thing that's happening. And I do believe that Australia are going to eventually bomb Syria, which is a terrible thing, because that country's been holding on for so long, they weren't able to topple them. And we need to get this information out to as many people as we can, to expose the lies that people are saying about Syria, John. So that's my 2 cents, is somewhat of a rebuttal to the discussion.
Yeah, but even then, though, you say that Bashar al-Assad was loved by his people. How do we know that?
I didn't say that. I said Gaddafi was.
Oh, Gaddafi. Okay, Gaddafi in Libya. Even then, though, I mean, once upon a time, I bought into that narrative, and to me, it seems plausible. But at the same time, then, like Gaddafi had been in charge for 30 years. Was he rogue from the start, and they gave him 30 years of leeway, or was he on the elite side and then he went rogue? I mean, let's reverse engineer. Let's go back in time here and work out, how could Gaddafi have ever been a genuine threat or problem to the people who really run the show?
Well, I thought that they were a problem when they tried to come together to create the gold standard, and that's when all of this destabilization began. And Gaddafi stood up at the United Nations in his speech and said that they're coming for all of us, my Muslim brothers and sisters, my Middle Eastern brothers and sisters, they're coming for us. And really roasted them in his United Nations speech. And then that's when it happened. And there was independent journalists all throughout the Middle East that were documenting that things aren't as what they've seen. And there's documentaries out there about the deception of Gaddafi and whatnot, of evidence showing that the people loved him. And as I said, I'm completely objective. I'm completely open and objective to hearing an alternative motive. But until someone produces proper documented evidence from a historical context to show that the mainstream media's narrative was correct, or that there's somewhere in between that is the truth, not A or B, that there's a C, then I'll be completely open to that. But as so far, I haven't seen that evidence presented in front of me, Johnno.
It's like, you know what I mean? It's sort of that the official story is, oh, this guy's a bad guy, we should go and bomb him. And then the alternative story is, oh no, he was a good guy, we shouldn't go and bomb him. But neither of them seem to actually provide evidence for the claims. Whereas me sitting here in my home in Brisbane, I'm saying, how the hell do I know what the hell's going on over there? I've got no evidence.
It's the same as the misconceptions of World War II. We have evidence that Hitler rebuilt his economy. We have evidence that Gaddafi rebuilt his economy. He provided free electricity. That you can see the change from the area of Libya to the present day, where Gaddafi improved living conditions. He improved everything for the people, just as Hitler did during World War II. And there's massive similarities between the two stories, between how people have been lied to and deceived. So if someone can show me that Gaddafi didn't rebuild his country, looking at the statistics, as you can see, that he greatly improved his country. He said that he would provide housing to every citizen before even his own parents, and that's exactly what happened. They died before they were able to get accommodation, because the country was so broken at the time. And until someone can show me that that's not real, that from point A in history to point B, it improved, and it wasn't a result of Gaddafi, or it was a result of some US-backed plan to present another side of the story, I'll be objective to it. But until then, I look at it as the same way I look at World War II. Hitler rebuilt his country, Gaddafi rebuilt his country. We can see that through video and documented evidence. And until someone presents another side of the story, Johnny, you sort of get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. You're saying that you're going to believe that he was the good guy until someone disproves it. What I'm saying is I'm going to be skeptical of all of the stories. Someone wants to tell me that Gaddafi was a bad guy. I'm like, where's the proof? If someone says to me Gaddafi was the good guy, I'm going to say, where's the proof? I want objective proof. And if I don't get objective proof from either side, I just won't believe either story. I mean, again, this is all happening, thousands of kilometers from where I stand. I don't really have to believe either of those narratives. You know what I mean? Like, that's the position that I take. Lindsay, do you get where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I understand. I understand. You were talking to me last week or the week before about World War II and the what's his name, von Braun, people like that, and it's the same attitude that you're adopting there. I can understand what you say.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, it makes a nice little segue into the international segment. Anyhow, we need to move on. Topic 1 for international is Scotland to ban GM crops. Ethan.
Yeah, cheers, Johnno. Now, this week it's a big change of pace here. This week had a lot of news to get through, and I wanted to take a different approach this episode and make an effort to include positive articles I have seen on the international front, and this is certainly one of them. Let me read out an article from BBC published August 9th, so it's recently, but not too recently, but it's entitled Scotland to Ban GMO Crop Growing. Quote, Scotland is to ban the growing of genetically modified crops, the country's Rural Affairs Secretary has announced. Richard Lockheed said the Scottish government was not prepared to gamble with the future of the country's $14 billion food and drink sector. He is to request that Scotland be excluded from any European consents for the cultivation of GM crops. But farming leaders say they were disappointed by the move. Under EU rules, GM crops must be formally authorised before they can be cultivated. An amendment came into force earlier this year which allows member states and developed administrations to restrict or ban the cultivation of genetically modified organisms within their territory. Mr. Lockheed said Scotland's request for opt-outs from GM crop consent would cover an EU-approved variety of genetically modified maize and 6 other GM crops that are awaiting authorization. He said Scotland was known around the world as a beautiful natural environment, and banning the growing of genetically modified crops would protect and further enhance its clean green status. Those were quotes. Mr. Lockheed added, quote, there is no evidence of significant demand for GM products by Scottish consumers, and I am concerned that allowing GM crops to be grown in Scotland would damage our clean and green brand, thereby gambling with the future of our $14 billion food and drink sector. Scottish food and drink is valued at home and abroad for its natural, high quality, which often attracts a premium price. And I've heard directly from food and drink producers in other countries that ditching GM because of consumer backlash, end quote. Now, it goes on to talk about characters like Scott Walker, who's from NFU Scotland, saying that he's disappointed that the Scottish government has decided that no GM crops should ever be grown in the country. And another character called Hugh Jones, who runs the Rotherham Research Molecular Genetics Centre, said the announcement was a sad day for science and a sad day for Scotland. And I love it. The dangers of GMO is something that I have held closely to my heart as a researcher for a number of years now, particularly in Australia, where we have GMO cotton, canola, soybean, corn, potatoes, and sugar beet. Not to mention Monsanto Australia's trials that are happening all over the country, especially the ones that are happening where researchers are using gene technology to improve the efficiency of animal production. It's just madness all over this country right now. And this is our food, Documentaries like Seeds of Destruction and the research into GMO products have shown extreme concern. So it's excellent to see something like this. As we've seen in other European countries, Scotland's not the only one. It's great to see that there's still some layer of accountability when it comes to transforming the production of food in these countries, because, Lindsay, this is a topic that really does affect everyone. It's the fundamental basis of human life, food and water, and to see that there is still some sort of resistance against these big companies like Monsanto, especially in Scotland, it really is, it is a positive thing to see this week.
Yeah, when you were mentioning that, it just reminded me, I remember reading an article this could be 10, 15 years ago, about a scientist who was doing research into the effects of GMO, and I think they finished up tossing him out of the university. And I'm pretty certain that was in Scotland. Do you remember that at all?
I do recall. I don't have the details in front of me, but yeah, it does ring a bell, Lindsay.
Yeah, I just found it sort of ironic that now suddenly that it's almost like a full circle, and now they're banning the GMOs after having banned him at that stage because he was, opening up a modicum of truth on the matter. I just can't remember exactly what it was, whether it was cattle walking through GMO crops to get to other crops or so. I just can't remember the details of it now. But I know that sort of opened my eyes up to it, because I remember at the time thinking, well, obviously these animals know what's good for them and what's not good for them. They just instinctively know. And they're willing to walk through a GMO crop to get to another crop, which is not GMO. So that sort of put me onto it way back when it first happened. But no, I agree entirely with you, and I would hope that places in Australia would do the same, but it's not going to happen now. And I think it's almost like the genie in the bottle. Once it gets out, you can't put it back in, because suddenly everything's got GMO pollen now, and they'll be buggering up all our crops if they haven't already. And it'll only be just later years that we see the results of that. And it is a great concern to me. I know Johnno's has got a bit of a thing about food at the moment. You've got this this idea about meat and stuff like that at the moment. Did you have a feeling about GMOs?
Look, GMOs instinctively seem to me like they could be a problem, but I haven't done the thorough research to know for sure one way or the other just how far this GMO business goes. I mean, it just seems logical to me that food is better off when it's grown the way it's meant to be grown, rather than being messed around with. And the corporations that are doing it are run by the same people who are doing everything else that's evil. So the natural inference is that this stuff would be messed up, but I haven't done the thorough research to know one way or the other. So I'll throw it back to Ethan.
Yeah, thanks, Johnno, and Lindsay, and Johnno as well. We have spoken previously on this show before about Steve Marsh over in Western Australia, who had his natural farm that he had, and genetically modified crops, as they do, overtook his farm because they overtake and they kill, sort of like a blanket effect over natural crops that are being grown. And it's not just our food. This is coming into everything. There's the genetically modified everything is coming in now, and they want to do genetically modified bees because of dropping bee populations, which we're causing as well. All of these things that are, as I said, documentaries like Seeds of Destruction, all the research into it. I'll leave links at AusRoundtable.com for everyone to find the dangers behind it. But if I could give somewhat of a final thought to this, it is the solution. And it would take me too much time to read out on the show today. So I'll leave a link at AusRoundtable.com for you to check out if you're interested in this field of research. But what I'll link to is an article by maj.org.au, which is a guide on how to shop GMO-free in this country, Australia, what to look out for, what to spot with imports in particular, and how to eliminate this from your life, plain and simple. I'll also link to a map of current testing sites in this country so you can get more information to see if any are near you, to see what products they're testing, if it's in your local region, if it's in your state, are they introducing it? So I'll have a map from government websites there where you can see all of the trials that are happening right now in this country. And with these resources, Johnno, one can eliminate, at least for now, genetically modified organisms from their lives in just a few steps. So this is a new story where we can have a solution personally, and as an individual, you can have a solution. You can eliminate these things from your life and get rid of them. And then the only thing to do then is to spread the information, to spread the dangers, to spread the alternative side, and hope that more people get on board. So I'll leave that as a final thought. Just head to AusRoundtable.com in the next few days when we have the links up on the website, and you'll be able to find all the information to really combat or educate yourself if you're unfamiliar about genetically modified organisms in Australia. And congrats to Scotland as well, John.
Good stuff. We'll move on to the second topic for international, to do with News Corp planning to sell off its education unit.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm back again. Now, this is a positive story again that I found in the press this week, and I thought I would include it on the show And it's in relation to our old friend of ours, Rupert Murdoch, Lindsay. And, we love to get stuck into him and celebrate his shortcomings on the show. So I've got an article in front of me from the New York Times from August 12th entitled News Corp planning to sell off money-losing education unit. Quote, amplify a much heralded push by News Corporation into digital education led by Joel Klein, a former New York City schools chancellor, is nearing its inglorious end. News Corporation, controlled by Rupert Murdoch, said on Wednesday that it would take a $371 million write-down on the education division and would move to wind down the production of tablets for school children, a key part of the unit's offering. Moreover, News Corp's chief executive, Robert Thompson, said in an earnings call with analysts that the company was in an advanced stage of negotiations with a potential buyer for the remaining education business. Together, the moves highlight the difficulty that has confronted News Corporation and others looking to move teaching into the digital age, relying on the internet and tablets to update traditional curriculums. Among Amplify's main propositions, an online curriculum that taught arts in a more vivid way, including videos, games, and apps, an introduction to the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, relied on a video with actor Chadwick Boseman, while a lesson on Edgar Allan Poe drew on games that students could play to solve a mystery. As positive as this relationship has been, Amplify and News Corp both believe it's time to explore new and exciting strategic opportunities, working with partners who share a deep understanding of what it takes to be successful in education, Mr. Klein added, end quote. So they try to put a positive spin on the end there, but the reality is they're having to sell this off because they're struggling at the moment. And this is part due to, for those who are unaware, News Corp's exit from the education business. It's a result of the company's reorganization that happened recently. When it created Amplify in 2012, the company was much larger, with 21st Century Fox Movie Studio and Fox Television under its umbrella. But a year later, Murdoch split the company in two. 21st Century Fox was for entertainment assets, and News Corporation, which included the newspaper and the education business, went a separate way. And because of this, the profits that they were gaining from 21st Century could no longer cover losses, and now here we are. So, Lindsay, we've seen News Corp in decline for a number of years now, and this seems to be another positive development, in my opinion. But most people I speak to aren't even aware that companies like this have their hand in a multitude of avenues in our life. So I want to throw to you first and ask you, were you aware that News Corp is a parent company for an education unit? And what are your thoughts generally on News Corp just continuing to lose money, continuing to lose sport each and every year across all platforms?
Well, it came as a surprise to me. I didn't realise they were in education at all. So that's a considerable interest to me. That's why I like listening to you when you talk about these things. As far as my mate Rupert goes, I keep reading the Courier Mail and they keep telling me that their circulation is increasing and they're going from step to step. But I don't think that's the case. And I find it a very positive thing that they're under pressure. And with a little bit of luck, in the not too distant future, we might even have him pulling out of quite a few of his newspapers, because I know even the local ones in here, I don't know of overseas listeners, but Brisbane, for instance, has like a free newspaper for the south, the north, various areas of Brisbane. And my understanding is that Rupert owns nearly all those newspapers, and they don't sell them; they give them away, but they're largely supported by advertising. I'd like to see him out of every damn thing. I don't think it's going to happen straight away, but this is very positive in that I think it's the beginning. So with a bit of luck, we'll see where it goes in the long term. But I think that's more to do with just the newspaper business in general is going down and people are going digital. And I think that's the major reason for it. Now, anyway, I'll throw it to Johnno and see what he's got to say on this too.
I haven't really looked far enough into it to offer any commentary. So, Ethan, I'll give you the final thought and then we'll move on to the next topic.
Yeah, thanks, Johnno. More of just an expansion on what Lindsay said before I close up. I see this as a positive due to the fact that News Corp, not just with this story, but is losing support in general. Now, John has alluded to the fact many times on this show, and that is they don't care that they're losing money. News Corp loses money every year, and this is no surprise. They don't care about losing money because their agenda doesn't need to profit in that way. Money's an illusion in the game to those that have enough of it. So in terms of loss in that sense, it really doesn't matter to me that they're losing money, etc. What matters to me is that they're losing support. And particularly with this story, we see Foxtel's losing subscribers, ratings are down, News Corp is just losing support, whether it's directly or indirectly, all over the world. And one of my main concerns was the influence that these devices built by the Murdoch empire would have been affecting in terms of the education system. It was, as I said, Lindsay, when I learned about it, it was a shock to see that Murdoch was a parent company to someone that develops tablets and educational resources with pre-programmed narratives on there. And that's what it was. It was narrative based. All of these things that they referred to in the article was narrative based. This is what happens. This is history, games and whatnot. And they already control the education system. So they're already morphing the kids in every avenue on TV and at school. So I'm happy. And that's why I thought it was a positive thing. I'm so happy that they're losing support, that they have to bail out of this education thing. I'll keep everyone updated on who buys it because it's up for sale, this education platform that they do have, this company. And as a final thought, I want to encourage everyone to do some research into conglomerates like this, Nescafe, News Corp, Viacom, Disney. Have a look at their connections and see how far the tentacles expand. One thing that hip-hop artists and activists, Low-Key, for example, was famous for pointing out was hypocrisies. He said, one line that he said in one of his songs was, "You're speaking on revolution while you're sitting in Starbucks," or "Think about that before you put Huggies nappies on your baby." Speaking of Israel and how you support them through their dollars. And we're all guilty of supporting evil in one way or another somehow, whether directly or indirectly, banking, taxes. But if we research and use our conscience before making decisions in our life, especially with education and news, as this story is demonstrated, it only takes a small amount of people to do that before things start to change, Jono, which I think that they will eventually. And that's all I've got to say.
Yeah, I like your optimism, mate. We'll move on to the third topic for international today. It's to do with Jewish groups getting 94% of US Homeland Security grants, Lindsay.
Yeah, thanks for that. Forward website I got this story from, and it was on the 29th of July. The headline said, Jewish groups get 94% of Homeland Security grants. And, quote, the Department of Homeland Security allocated to Jewish institutions 12 million or 94% of 13 million in funds for securing non-profits. Not quite sure what that means. The Jewish Federations of North America's Washington office director, William Daroff, said Tuesday that the allocation made sense, particularly in the light of an intensification of threats on Jewish community targets in the United States and overseas. Quote, in the current environment, there are threats to non-profits and to Jewish institutions, end of quote, he told JTA. Noting a swell of attacks on Jewish institutions in Europe in the wake of the Israel-Hamas war in the Gaza Strip. We see it clearly in Europe, but we also see it here in the United States, in Kansas City, in Seattle, and numerous occasions that are not made public or do not come to fruition, Daroff said. He referred to attacks in recent years on Jewish community centers in Kansas City and Seattle. The allocations announced July the 25th are based on applications that are then assessed for threat by local and federal law enforcement officials. The $13 million dispersed last week bring to $151 million the amount dispersed since the program started in 2005, most of it to Jewish institutions. And that's the end of the quote. Now, the reason I put that here is that that's almost too blatant to be true. I know the Homeland Security had a number of Jews as the boss over recent years, but this makes it almost seem as if the whole purpose of Homeland Security is to secure Jews, not the homeland. Is that unreasonable to make that comment, do you think, John?
Based on the 96% figure, it seems that way. And the issue here is that you got those figures from the Jewish Daily Forward.
Yeah.
The Forward is a Jewish newspaper.
Yeah,
so this isn't some kind of anti-Jewish paper that's publishing these figures. And I'm with you. For me, I'd have to see another source give me the same figures before I could believe it, because it just seems it couldn't possibly be that high.
No, well, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? That was my first reaction. The only thing I said was, like I say, they've been Sartoff or whatever his name was. There've been a couple of Jewish bosses of Homeland Security recently. So maybe there is more to it than meets the eye. You know, maybe it is pretty much a Jewish-controlled organisation. But why call it? Oh, I suppose. Sorry, I was going to say, why call it Homeland Security? Obviously, you call it Homeland Security when it's not Homeland.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a bit slow. So, sorry, I'll see what Ethan's going to say.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting, and Lindsay, I also looked up. You know, I was also very familiar when I started going down the rabbit hole of how Homeland Security and their Zionist influence that they did have within the ranks there. As I said, I'm on board with you guys as well. You know, if this is true, it really is something remarkable. You know, but I'd always have to see a second source, because mainstream media propaganda or propaganda from any outlet, there's always propaganda, could have exaggerated figures or whatnot. I'd be interested to actually see where these statistics had come from, a source document. But it's just interesting, and we know, as I said, that there is Zionist influences in Homeland Security, so it wouldn't be too much of a shock if it was revealed as legitimate, which as it comes straight from the Forward newspaper, it has the opportunity to be legitimate. And yeah, I don't really have much more to add on it, but it's the same thing we say every week. The tentacles run thick, Johnno.
Indeed they do. We need to move on to the next topic. It is related. We'll go straight to the big admissions that Joe Biden made. It was a few months ago. You've been meaning to talk about it, Lindsay. Now's the chance to do it.
Yeah, thanks for that. This is, I have been dragging it along. I hope it's not too big. But anyway, I'll start. It came from the New York Magazine website, and it was on the 22nd of May, so it's a fair while ago. But the headline was written, Biden praises Jews, goes too far, accidentally thrills anti-Semites. How would you write that? Sorry, who wrote that? Anyway, I'll just quote straight away. Joe Biden spoke last night in honor of Jewish American Heritage Month. Biden has long, deep ties to the Jewish community. Obama actually picked him in 2008 in part to reassure skittish Jewish Democrats. Biden indeed offered fulsome, heartfelt praise in his remarks before wandering into highly uncomfortable terrain and delivering a speech that is likely to be quoted by anti-Semites for years and decades to come. And in brackets, it's already the subject of excited discussion among the white supremacist community. End of the brackets. Biden's remarks were not anti-Semitic. They were very, very philo-Semitic. The thrust of his largely unscripted monologue is that Jews have contributed enormously to the United States. That's obviously a standard spiel for praising any ethnic group, but Biden took care to emphasize that Jews have not just contributed their share to the United States, but far more. The Jewish people have contributed greatly to America. No group has had such an outsized influence per capita as all of you standing before me, all of those who went before me, and all of those who went before you. You make up 11% of the seats in the United States Congress. You make up 1/3 of all Nobel laureates. I think you, as usual, underestimate the impact of Jewish heritage. I really mean that. I think you vastly underestimate the impact you've had on the development of this nation. Quote, you can't talk about the civil rights movement in this country without talking about Jewish freedom riders and Jack Greenberg, end of quote, he said, telling a story about seeing a group of Jewish activists at a segregated movie theater in Delaware. And then, quote, you can't talk about the women's movement without talking about Betty Friedan, end of quote. I believe what affects the movements in America what affects our attitudes in America are as much the culture and arts as anything else, he said. That's why he spoke out on gay marriage, apparently a little ahead of time. It wasn't anything we legislatively did. It was will and grace. It was the social media, literally. That's what changed people's attitudes. That's why I was so certain that the vast majority of people would embrace the rapidly gay marriage. Sorry, anyway, I'll keep reading. Biden said, think behind of all that. I bet you 85% of those changes, whether it's in Hollywood or social media, are a consequence of Jewish leaders in the industry. The influence is immense. The influence is immense. and I might add, it is all to the good. So I've got to stop cracking up. I can see why, and this is me now, I can see why the white supremacist community were loving this speech. He just confirmed everything that they'd been saying and getting hit over the head about as being anti-Semites. He's come out and he's confirmed every damn thing, hasn't he? Okay, Ethan, have you got a comment on that?
Lindsay, I was sitting here giggling to myself just how much you were enjoying reading that out. Yeah, well, it's not entirely false at all. You know, the influence that they've had has really shaped the country to the way that it has developed today. Just not for the right reasons. Obviously, we know that, but I don't really have much more to add, Johnno. So I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, I saw this one in Lindsay's agenda. As our listeners know, he puts together a list of articles he wants to talk about before every show. I saw this one there and I read through it and I thought this really does say, as Lindsay says it does, this does say everything that the so-called white supremacists have been saying for a long time. And of course, they're called white supremacists. Anybody who's proud of being white is a white supremacist. Any other race of people, and that's perfectly fine. We encourage that. That's great. It's terrific. If white people show any pride in themselves, well, they're white supremacists, even though, as we've established on this show many times, it's not white people who control the media. It's not white people who control banking and finance. It's people who pass themselves off as white when it suits them and then admit what they really are when it suits them then. And that's what's going on here. And so when they say that this just confirms what the white supremacists have been saying, no, it confirms what any thinking person has been saying. Yeah. It just so happens that many of those thinking people are white and are not ashamed of being white. And why should anyone be ashamed of any skin color that they are? Yeah. And sure enough, even in this article, where they've got Biden admitting to everything that most of us already know, they still manage to get in a dig at the so-called white supremacists, don't they?
Yeah. No, I agree with you entirely. Anyway, I obviously, to me, we should have put this at the beginning. It was amusing. It amused me. But anyway, I'm hoping our listeners enjoyed it. That's all I can say.
Well, as we always say, we do provide links to all of these articles at AusRoundtable.com, AUSRoundtable.com. We don't expect people to believe us when we read out these quotes. They should go and check the articles for themselves. If they find the articles interesting, bookmark them, share them with people you think could use the information. That's what this show is meant to be all about. Just gathering the information that we think is useful, reading out aloud, getting our listeners to give back their feedback on that, and hopefully helping to spread information that we think is useful to people, and they can make up their own minds whether it is or not, but they need to go to AusRoundtable.com to check it for themselves. There's no ads there. There's no donation button. We don't make money from you visiting. We just provide the links to this information. So if you want it, you can access it for yourself, which of course is opposite of what the news do. The news just tell you what to believe, and that's it. We say, no, don't believe what we say. Here's just an article that Lindsay's read out. He found it amusing. Check it out for yourself. Maybe you'll find it amusing too. And that's what it's all about, Lindsay. Yeah. We need to move on to the fifth and final topic for International today. And I want to read out an article from a newspaper in London, a business newspaper in London. This is from City AM. And the title of it is, "The UK is more positive than the US or Germany towards immigration, with 3 out of 10 saying migration benefits Britain." This is by Clara Guiborg, and I think it's from a few days ago. I haven't got the date right in front of me. There you go, August 7, so about just over a week ago. Let me quote, "Britons are more positive than most towards immigration, shows a new survey from Ipsos Mori on global attitudes towards migration, but the burden on the country's public services remain a concern. Intensifying debate about border controls and rising migration levels, especially in the run-up to the general election, have done little to dampen public opinion about immigration. 3 in 10 people feel that migrants benefit the UK, a figure that's risen by 9 percentage points since 2011, and is above the global average of 21%, end quote. And then they provide a graph, which I recommend listeners check out for themselves on our site. I'll link to this article, they can check it out for themselves. But it goes through a list, and for comparison's sake, they've got, say, Hungary, 6% of people feel that immigration is good for them. Japan, 13%. Israel, 18%. Germany, 20%. So all in the minority, all in the small minority, do people actually think migration is good for them? Australia, they list us at 36%. So a country that supposedly prides itself on immigration, only 1 in 3 people actually think that immigration is good for us. And so on and on the list goes. And the reason why I find this article interesting is because, like I always say to people, if immigration was so good for us, let's have a vote about it. They won't give us a vote about it because they know that we'd vote against it. And in fact, other polling shows that some of the people who are most against the mass immigration that's taking place in countries like Australia are themselves first and second generation immigrants. Yeah. And that's why they won't let us vote on it, because they know that we're against it, Lindsay.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And when you said that, I can remember being in a country town in New South Wales where there were Chinese who'd come out in the gold and silver days, a century ago, and they were against mass Chinese immigration because they knew what it was like where they came from, and they didn't want a replication here, which I found quite interesting because I was only a young kid then. So yeah, I agree with you there. The other thing too is I remember back in maybe 1972 or thereabouts, there was this push to change the immigration. Prior to that, we'd had this white Australia policy, and then they started having the push to bring in Asian immigration, and they kept assuring us it was a special case to do with the Vietnam War. These poor refugees and what have you. I think they were Catholics mostly, and they were being hunted down by the communists and etc. So it's not the thin edge of the wedge, and that's the term they use. It's not the thin edge of the wedge. It's just a one-off, and it will never increase. And we'll look at it now. They just lied through their teeth, and they knew damn well at the time they were lying through their teeth. And they kept blockading us until it was too late, and they actually changed the nature of things. And now, if we come to have a referendum about the Constitution or any major thing in Australia, they've actually, like you're just talking about, they've actually undermined us by as much as 20 or 30% of the population now are foreign born and don't understand the background of where we came to be or how we came to be what we are today, whether it be Magna Carta or all those other things. So yeah, I think I find it very distasteful. I've got a copy of an article, once again, about Jewish influence on immigration in Australia that I could like to bring in one day. But once again, I read so much of this stuff, I don't want to bore people with it. But you just said it before, it's coming from the same group. Every time you look at something, it's coming from the same group. And immigration in Australia is coming from them. I know it is in America. I don't know about Britain and Europe in general. You might know more about this than me. Maybe Ethan knows.
Well, I mean, like this article shows, and this is just one poll, people ought to check into other polls and then question the legitimacy of each of the polls, what have you. But what you'll find is, objectively and anecdotally, the majority of people in all of these countries are against mass immigration being foisted upon them. And certainly in this country, it is mass immigration. Back in the mid-1990s, we were importing something like 70 to 80,000 people per year. Now that's closer to 200,000 people per year. In fact, according to my figures, it's closer to 250,000 people per year into a country of roughly 24 million people. And of course, it's worse in Australia because we only have 5 major cities that all the people go to: Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. They're all going to one of those 5 cities. Yeah. So the cities are growing at an astronomical rate. That's why the infrastructure is so clogged. That's one of the reasons why the infrastructure is so clogged up. That's one of the reasons why house prices are so high, is because we're having these people foisted upon us. And the point that I'm trying to make here is the people don't want it. Now, we either have to be honest and say, do we believe in democracy or don't we? Because surely of all the things you should be allowed to vote on, one of the ones at the top of the list is who else is allowed to come to your country and in what numbers do they do so? And if you're not allowed to vote on that, or if you don't think people should be allowed to vote on that, fine. Just don't pretend you believe in democracy. Stop pretending you believe in democracy. If you don't want people to have the right to vote on this, Ethan, what say you?
Yeah, that's right, Johnno. And I agree with you. And, I'm always skeptical of statistics and surveys, but I know through my personal experiences that even people, because, it wasn't as obvious when I first started going down the rabbit hole. It wasn't as obvious when I started my activism work in Brisbane City and whatnot, it wasn't as obvious that multiculturalism and mass immigration was necessarily something that had some legitimate concerns over, and even people that I knew from back then that have gone now, and even people like my immediate family who are not involved with the truth movement, they don't know anything, they don't make an active effort to research some of these things. Even they look at it now and say, hang on a minute, there is a concern here, and we all have concerns no matter what it's from. We could all have different perspectives on what the concern are, but you're right, Jono, the people, as I said, I'm always skeptical of statistics, but I can say that is likely true based on my interactions. But if the people have concerns, where's the discussion? And that's ultimately the underlying mechanisms that are at play here, is that there's no discussion. There's no discussion happening. There's no discussion. All you're being told is if you're against multiculturalism, if you're against mass immigration, you're a racist, or you're not for free humanity, or whatever their argument is that people have been trained to respond with. But until we have the discussion, which is not being offered into this country, which the statistics show and personal experiences can show that people are starting to question this thing, until that comes in, I refuse to normalize that anything can be as it seems right now, when it's jumped so far within a matter of a decade without people having the discussion. It's all about two sides of the story again, as I've always said. And Jono, you bring up a good point with this article, is that the people that have approved this are in the minority, yet that's not the way the media will portray it on the television sets, Jono.
Yeah, and We're Awake in the live chat says that immigration's okay. It's all about how they do it. I completely agree. Immigration's natural, and you're going to have immigration from one country to another. That's entirely natural. But foisting 200 to 250,000 people upon an island nation of 24 million people, that's not only is that not natural, that's incredibly destructive. And I've made the point before, even if that was 250,000 white people, I'd be saying that's too many people coming to this country. Our infrastructure can't cope with it. Our housing stock can't cope with it. It's too much change too quickly, not good for the country. The fact that it's 60 to 70% non-white immigration as well just adds a whole other dimension to that. And anyone who is honest with themselves, who's objective, who'll look at these things without the programmed responses, who'll be serious about this and really question who's benefiting from this, they'll realize that there's an agenda here. And then if they look to other countries throughout the white Western world, particularly in Europe, when they see that it's happening there as well, they'll realize it's all white countries, it's only white countries. There's an agenda behind this. It doesn't help us. It helps a very small group of people whose plan is to eventually breed out the whites and then move on to the other groups. Now, if you've never heard people like me talking like this before, this will sound very confronting, because of all the things that you've been programmed to believe. At the top of the list is any person who talks in racial terms like I'm talking now, who says there's a difference between the races and they should all be allowed to exist. The Chinese should be allowed to exist in China, the Japanese in Japan, the Africans in Africa, and white people in white native countries. People like me who talk this way, you've been programmed to think that we're evil and that we hate people. But you know what I think? I think that if you don't want the white race to go on existing, you're the hater. You hate white people. Why the hell do you hate white people? And especially if you've got white skin, why are you a self-hating whitey? Because you've been trained to be like that. It's pathetic. It's disgusting. You need to start thinking for yourself and ask yourself, why were you trained to hate the color of your skin? There's a reason why you were, and it's not for your benefit. People like me, we say that in 200 years, 500 years, we want all the races to still exist as they are, because they're all beautiful in their own way. None is necessarily better than the other. I don't think that way at all. I think we'll have our own qualities and our own disqualities. That's just natural. But what isn't natural is trying to get them all to mix together to wipe them all out. And I'm the one who genuinely believes in diversity, because I want it to still remain in a few hundred years. And if you're happy to see countries like Sweden with the white native population being wiped out, then there's something truly sick and disgusting about your mind. And if you're trying to project that onto me, then I feel sorry for you, and I feel sorry for anyone who thinks like you, because it's pathetic. But we need to move on to the final thoughts for the episode, Lindsay.
Yeah,
so that's what we're going to do right now. It's been an interesting episode. I'm always happy to have you in the live panel. And you know what? Because you're here and Ethan isn't, he has to go first with the final thoughts. Ethan, for episode 45, any final? Of course, we've got the live chat coming up straight afterwards, and we're going to talk about that bombing in the so-called bombing in China recently, among other topics in the after show. So live listeners, stick around. Before the official upload, Ethan, for episode 45, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I do have a few final thoughts, John. I actually wrote them down this week, which is a change for me. First, I do encourage everyone to go to tottnews.com, my website, Australian Alternative Media. I hardly do promote it on the show. And I think a plug every now and then's not too bad. I've got a lot of things coming up on the horizon. As soon as I get time to do them, that it's just going to start coming out. So I do encourage everyone to go to tottnews.com to view my website and have a look at the articles and share them around. Again, the second one is radfm.com every Friday from 4 p.m. Australian Roundtable Podcast. The delayed broadcast from this weekend is on radfm.com. And I usually edit the audio and include a couple stories I found through the week or whatnot to add a little bit extra for people that don't want to listen to the same show. So I do encourage everyone to go to radfm.com, have a look at the programs that are there, and tune into the Australian Roundtable Podcast every Friday. And speaking of the programs, one of the best ones is the Know Your Right program, which is Tuesdays from 8 p.m. onwards, and a plug for their upcoming seminar here in Brisbane on August 22nd. So that's next weekend, Saturday. They're going to be in Brisbane doing the Know Your Rights. They're going to be at Salisbury Bowls Club, which is in Salisbury. I'll leave all the details at ozroundtable.com, but they're going to have a massive seminar going through current systems, traffic fines, legality of laws, all of these things. And they're going to have also a Sydney seminar coming up as well. It's a very popular show, so they're going to be all over the country. I'll leave all links at ozroundtable.com for you to check it out. And if you're really fed up with the system and want to find a way that you can stick it to them, head out to the Know Your Rights seminar, August 22nd at Salisbury Bowls Club. A big shout out to Fair Dinkum Radio. Fair Dinkum Radio, Leon from Fair Dinkum Radio got in contact with us at the Australian Roundtable Podcast and invited us to go on to the show. So I have accepted to go on. I'm a big fan of his work. So please check out Fair Dinkum Radio in the near future. When I do the interview, I'll obviously promote it here on the show for everyone to check out. And finally, a thank you to everyone that has tuned in here today on the show. I love that we've had over 50 people here, and I appreciate everyone coming out. And thanks for listening to my voice so much through this episode, and especially in this long final thoughts. But thank you to everyone for coming out, and that's it for me, Johnno.
Excellent stuff. Lindsay, good to have you in the live studio as always, and it has been a fun show. The after show coming up soon, but for the official upload, final thoughts.
Okay. I haven't got a lot that I can add to what Ethan's saying. The only thing, Ethan sent me an email during the week about one of our listeners, I won't say his name on here, who was talking about us doing something a bit more on law and stuff like that too. So we'll have to discuss that, Ethan, because I would like, it follows on from what you're talking about at Salisbury. We'll have to do a bit more on that and get a few of the listeners involved in it. There's not much else I can add to that. I enjoy this because I find things from you blokes all the time. So I really like it. It does me the world of good to come out and do this and just to listen to what you fellas have to say. I hope our listeners outside also feel that way about it. They get something out of it. They must, otherwise they wouldn't come and listen. So that's about it. I appreciate the listening. Thank you very much.
No worries. I'm also thankful for listeners tuning in live. We did have around about 50 for most of the show. We do appreciate that. Just a quick thing. Depopulation Agenda, who I think is generally a decent commenter, says, well, the white people all came to Australia. It's a bit hypocritical for them to stop others coming. And I would say, well, maybe you came here, but I was born here. Or is the fact that I have white skin mean that I wasn't born here, or that me being born here is somehow... do you see what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
They're trying to tell me that because white people came here 200 years ago, that makes it okay to wipe out white people today. Can you not see how utterly sick and twisted that is? I was born here, and I feel like I have a right to say, you know what, since I live here, I feel like I should have a right to say how many people can come here as well. And I think that we all have that right. And like I said, what's funny is you look into the polling here, it's the second generation immigrants who are the most against immigration. So fine if you want to look down on the whiteys for what they supposed to do 200 years ago. If that's your line of logic, I can't help you. But if you're thinking about this rationally, no, I think everybody who currently lives here has a right to say who else should be able to come here and in what numbers. And guess what? The majority of them are against mass immigration. So like I said, either believe in democracy or you don't. And if you don't, just be honest about it. Just stop pretending. That's what I can't stand is the pretense. Either you believe in the notion that we should be allowed to have a say in what goes on around us, or you don't. And just be consistent. That's all I ask.
Yeah.
But we need to wrap up the official show. So I want to say personal thanks for everyone who's tuned in, not just live, but on delay. We do upload these as MP3 now. And who knows at what point in the future, maybe 5, 10, who knows, maybe they'll be there in 20 years and someone might take the time to go back and listen to us all those years in the future. So I hope things didn't turn out as bad as I predicted. I hope everything's great. Thanks for listening to us. 2015, another lovely day here in Brisbane. Thanks to Ethan. Thanks to Lindsay. I'm your host, John Bond. We'll see you guys at 3 p.m. Brisbane time next week.